Hello, my name is Tom Hill. I'm Head of Global Sponsorship for Manchester United. I'm responsible for the acquisition and the retention of our partners and the business development within sponsorship.
And working for Manchester United, how have you observed sponsorship to evolve over the past 5 years or 10 years?
I think brands are being more thoughtful with regards to what they're wanting to sponsor, and even is sponsorship the right answer for their current predicament or their current set of objectives. So we may be considered as a possible option, along with, do they want to do a global television campaign? So it's not just should we sponsor football, cricket, sailing. So I think brands have put much more thought and emphasis and analysis into what are they trying to achieve, and if sponsorship is the answer, in fact, before they get further into rights and money.
And how's the relationship between the brand sponsoring a club and the club itself? How's that developed over the course of the past decade or so?
I think resource is always an issue there with regards to once the deal is done, now what? You know, we've spent all these money on the rights, what are we going to do with them? So I think there's two sides to that. One is, do they have the resource? Do they need to resource up? And so I'd always think about that when you're buying sponsorship, is are we able to actually activate? And then secondly, on the rights holder side, is do you have the ability to be able to manage the partner properly, get the assets working, setting of objectives, measuring success, sorting out return on investment, so that the partnership develops and grows and hopefully turns into a long-term one, rather than we tried it, we had a go, it didn't work. That's the worst situation, it's the worst scenario or situation possible.
And you previously worked in rugby for the RFU and for Saracens, I think. How does the approach differ, if at all, between a governing body and a club in terms of sponsorship?
Again, resource I think is key there in terms of how many people do you have generating revenue, and how important is the generation of revenue to your business. So the governing body obviously has a significant number of elements that they need to control, manage and develop, whereas a professional football club, we have fewer things to focus on in that regard, especially commercially. We can put more effort and time into developing our revenues. So resource is really a key one. Beyond that, I think expertise is key. Football's a more mature commercial market than rugby. So there's potentially some learnings from football, but equally other sports. I'm not saying football by any means is the finished article. And that's something that we always do, is look at what else is there out there, what are other people doing. We're not just sat on our laurels with regards to we're doing quite well, thank you, we must be the best. So always looking around, I think, is useful to do as well.
And as you said, football is a very developed commercial entity, and rugby, I suppose, is slightly more developing. But where do you think rugby sits now in terms of as a sponsorship proposition in the overall sports marketplace?
I think it's grown tremendously. We were talking earlier in the conference. I think the growth since the last World Cup on these shores has shown that rugby is now a much more considered proposition for sponsorship, rather than historically being motor racing or cricket or some of the more traditional sports. So I think rugby's done a very good job in terms of positioning itself nationally and internationally as a sponsorable entity.
And where do you see that going in the future? Could you see a day when rugby gets close to where football is now?
Yeah, I don't think it's that far behind. I mean, obviously the revenues may be different, but you've also got to think about the globalisation of the sport and how many countries are playing the sport, and also what TV coverage does it get, because the Football Premiership is the most popular premiership in the world, and it's available in 220 countries around the world. So when you have that base, then you have that access and you have that knowledge in terms of people knowing who you are. So I think rugby needs to focus on not only the club and the development of the game, but also the growth and the accessibility of it. So TV plays a huge part in the globalisation of the sport. But then Sevens coming into the Rio Olympics and already being in the Commonwealth Games, I think, has a great part to play in that as well.